Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Geezerology. Bill and I are here today. We're going to talk about a landmark album from 50 years ago, released on September 8 of 1972. This one is Close to the Edge by Yes, one of the more well-regarded and well-known of the early 70s prog albums. There's been so much said about this record. I'm not going to sit here and go over things that a million other people have talked about this record before. We all have some kind of knowledge of this record, but I just want to say that this is one of my desert island discs. If the whole desert island disc thing, I would take this one. This came along at a time where I was just graduated from high school. In fact, I heard most of this, or half of this album I heard before the album ever was released, right? I graduated from high school in May of 1972, and I had just got on to Yes, became a pretty good fan of Yes from the Fragile album, which was their 1971 offering. And their big hit Roundabout. This was kind of music I hadn't heard before. I was coming off my run through the Doors and Jimi Hendrix and all that gang, and I heard Roundabout. It blew me away. Got on to Yes, and then in the summer of 1972, in August, Yes appeared at the Mississippi River Festival in Edwardsville, Illinois, just out of St. Louis, where I grew up in the St. Louis area. And my fellow geezer and I, Dan, who's not here today, but he's usually here with us on the round table, but he and I and a couple of other people were fans of Fragile and the Yes album. So we decided to go ahead and drive across the Mississippi River over to Edwardsville and catch this band. And that came out, and they had a big production where they started the show with they played the Stravinsky's Firebird Suite, and they came out on the stage while that was playing. Made a big production as you expect from a band that has a big sound and all this. And they opened with a tune that I'd never heard before. But this song was just a killer rock song, just a heavy riff song, and I thought, well, okay, there are a couple of Yes albums that I hadn't heard before. I thought it was maybe from one of those earlier albums that I hadn't heard yet. Well, no, this was the opening song of this show was Siberian Katru. And John Anderson, the lead singer, he talked about, well, yeah, that's we just recorded a new album. It's not out yet, but that's a song for a new album. I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. I mean, how often do you go to a concert and wanting to hear the songs that you know from a band, and they play something you never heard before, but it just really grabbed me. It's really good. And then later in the show, and then they went through all their stuff from the Yes album and from Fragile. And in the middle of the show, they did And You and I. He introduced the song by the title And You and I, and I remembered that, and that was pretty good too. So then went home. It was a great show. Dan and I both loved it. We were buzzing for the show for a while. They were very, very good. One of our big things is we didn't know how well they would be able to do these complicated songs that they were doing on record. We didn't know if they'd be able to pull the stuff off live, but they did. They were very good. And so the album then. I waited and waited and waited and waited, and then the album was finally released in September, which was about it wasn't that long. I'm just looking at the dates. It was a couple of weeks later. It seemed to me I remembered it being a long time waited for it, but it was just a couple of weeks after this, and I fell in love with this thing. The title track, the 18-minute opening title track, has become a classic in the realm, and one of my benchmarks in my music discovery and in those early days of my adult life. but I did find out this record, it did turn out to be just a marvel of production work. I'll go through a couple of stories I've heard about how this album was put together. But the thing I want to point out, we didn't hear the title track, Close to the Edge, at that show that night. And I learned out why. I learned later why, because they hadn't learned to play this song yet. They had finished recording the album and put it together, but like I say, we saw them just Alan White had just Bill Bruford left the band right after they recorded, because Bruford didn't like the direction they were going. Bruford wanted to be he didn't want to be so controlled. He wanted to do some more improvisations and things like that. King Crimson reached out to him, offered him a job, and he decided to go join King Crimson because they were more in tune to where he wanted to go, and they hired Alan White. Well, as it turns out, the show that we saw was just the fourth or fifth show that Alan White had played with. I mean, White had only been with the band for 3 weeks when we saw him in concert. And the way they put together this 18-minute title track, Close to the Edge, was these were just all pieces and parts that John Anderson and Steve Howe had been working on while they were on a previous tour for Fragile album. And they never went into the studio and played this thing all the way through, right? They'd have this bit and they'd record this bit, they'd have that bit, they'd record that bit, and Eddie offered, say, well, we need a little slow piece here, so they'd go and record a little slow piece. And as it turned out, how they put this thing together, it turned out to be seamless, which is more incredible now that since I've learned the story. But and this was all done by hand. None of this, there were no computers at the time. So I've heard stories during interviews where when they were recording this bit, that bit, this bit, that bit, I mean, they just had hundreds of pieces of real tape laying around. And it was just basically John Anderson and Steve Howe and Eddie Offord, the credited producer on this record. They're just going through and just going through all these different bits of tapes and putting them in a machine and splicing them all together and making this big piece of music from it. And it took them a while to learn how to play that piece of music after they made it a piece of music, right? They learned how to play this song basically later, and it's become a staple of their live show. Not too long after that, they started playing it live, and they've been playing it live now for 50 years. But yes, basically learned first learned how to play this song live by copying the record that they had put together from all these bits and pieces of tape laying around. And after hearing that story, over the years, and when I go back and listen to this track now, and over and over again, I listen to it, and with that in mind, and trying to find it, and it's just it's so seamless. It's remarkable how seamless this thing turned out, considering how it was put together. I mean, Eddie Offord gets a lot of credit from me for this record because he had a lot of complicated work he had to do. They even talk about one time where they had, I saw an interview with John Anderson recently where he was recalling how this was put together, and he said there was one night where they had all these pieces of tapes laying around everywhere, hanging from clotheslines, clothespins on clotheslines, and laying on tables, and just scattered everywhere, and just trying to put all this together. Well, the cleaning crew came in one night and just grabbed a bunch of these, thought a bunch of them were trash, and took them and threw them out in a dumpster behind the recording studio. And and they came in, Anderson and Alford came in the next day, so where'd all these things go? And they finally did. They finally went out. They thought, well, one of them got thrown out, and they went out and they saw all these things just in this dumpster. And they go dumpster diving in to try to retrieve all these things, and it took them all day. I mean, they throwing trash around and everything, and they finally get everything out of the dumpster, take it back in the studio. A lot of them are wet, and they got out hair dryers and and had to dry off these pieces of tape and everything like that. And Anderson said that miraculously they were able to retrieve and were able to salvage everything, so everything was still usable. But it was a scary moment for them. Yeah, just to say, yeah, this is, I don't want to say that this is the this is the prog album that started all prog albums, of 70s prog, which really became a thing in the next few years. But I think this is an album that really set the bar for what a lot of people started doing for the rest of the decade before punk came in and just wiped prog off the face of the map for a couple of decades. Great stuff. I think it's one of the best rock albums ever made, especially during that period. I can't say enough good things about it. Again, I don't want to go through all the details of it. We all know about this album. We all know where it stands in the pantheon of prog albums. So I'll just leave it there. But I'm just interested to hear from Bill what his background is on this record and how he came to listen to this thing.
Well, it's I probably have one of those issues given the time frame that you're talking about, Scott. So you mentioned graduating in 72. I graduated in 78. And my first exposure to Yes was tangential, because I would say that growing up, every basement rec room with its black lights and the posters also included Close to the Edge, because every older sibling seemed to have this record. And for some reason, the only Yes song that I would have heard that I was familiar with is Roundabout, because they would play that on FM radio. But I didn't really know anything else about Yes until my first Yes album that I bought was Going for the One, which is in 77, and it's a whole different thing, and it's got nothing really to do, except that there are some members of the group who are still there. It's really nothing to do with Close to the Edge and that kind of peak prog rock, which is, you're right. I mean, if you say prog, people if they don't say Czechoslovakia, they'll say that Yes, because they are kind of the quintessential prog rock band. And at this point, they have all of those pieces that in retrospect, I wish I had been paying attention to then, and when the record came out, because I do like it a lot. It's not, I wouldn't say it's something I would listen to regularly, but in preparation for this, I think I had probably only heard it maybe once or twice previously. I never owned it, but I was surprised at how much I actually liked it. The first time I played it a couple of weeks ago, I was, saying, "Oh my gosh, I got to play this again just to get through it, just so I can have some sense of how it flows." And the second time I played it, I started to actually understand how the rhythms of the whole album worked. And the third time I played it, I really liked it, and I especially liked the first suite of songs. I guess that's the Close to the Edge part, because it's got some great instrumental work, and it's got a great chorus, and the band members sing this in a way that makes it really powerful. So it builds to a great crescendo, and from my standpoint, when you play that, if you give it enough time, you'll really appreciate it. And then the whole packaging of the record, with the Roger Dean logo, which again is, that's kind of high, mid or early 70s rock and roll art design, kind of mystical. You feel like you're somewhere in between, the Lord of the Rings world and, whatever Jimmy Page is cooking up, at some point. So it's quite evocative in that way as well. So I would say that, I wish I had listened to it when I had the opportunity. I was a little scared of it because it seemed so complicated, and older kids were listening to it. So I didn't get into it until it was, past its peak. And, but, when I listened to their later stuff, the, Going for the One, and then, the stuff that happened afterwards when they essentially became a highly tuned pop prog rock band in the early 80s, and when they had a couple of breakthrough hits, they were completely different by that point. And that was, overlapped with, post-punk, not just to mention punk and all of the other genres. They seemed kind of, fuddy-duddy-ish, kind of old-fashioned sort of thing. But now I, go back and I listen to it, and I can say, you could slot this stuff in with, King Crimson and Genesis of the Gabriel era, and Vandergraaf Generator and Hawkwind and all of these other outfits that I really, really like and appreciate. And you can see how it all worked at that time, especially in '72. They were kind of the flagship band for this kind of work. The last thing I would note is I was looking on YouTube. There's a great '72 piece of a video of them actually doing a Close to the Edge live. So it must have been, as you said, they were working on it and they figured out how to do it live, and it comes across quite well. But it is, I don't know what time in '72, pretty impressive, because it's a hard piece of music to get to, yeah. And they don't
really dense and really chaotic and
yeah.
And I thought because I walked away from that, and then when I heard the album and learned the album, I remembered, they didn't do the big one back when I saw them. But as I say, I mean, they were still early in the process. Ellen White was still learning all their material, right? And yeah, that's it. I mean, it took them a while to learn it. I think that tour went through middle or late of 1973. They hit the US first, and then they toured England. And yeah, the result of that tour then was I think a triple live album, Yes Songs, and then I think the video that you're referring to was actually a theatrical movie that they released called Yes Songs, which was released in conjunction with the live album, and it was from I think it was mostly from a show in Stockholm or something like that near the end of the tour. So by that time they had they had gotten up the courage and figured out how to actually play this beast on stage in front of people, right? From beginning to end. Yeah, it's a beast. It's a beast, no kidding. I mean, it's just, there's so many different. This is something that this is one of those rare pieces, I think, especially close to the edge. We're talking about it. I haven't even mentioned the other two songs really, except briefly. But this is a piece where you can listen to it and focus on
Mhm.
If there are about 7 or 8 different things you can focus on, right? I mean, you can listen to this album and say, I'm going to listen to nothing except Chris Squire's bass to this song, and you will be blown away just by listening to the bass lines, right?
Yeah, he's almost playing like lead guitar on it.
He played the bass guitar like a lead guitar almost sometimes. Yeah, they had a minor hit single with an edited version of "And You and I," and then "Siberian Katru," which is the closing song on the album. It turns out that's my favorite of all the Yes tracks. I just love that tune, and I love that from the first time I heard it when they opened their show with it back in August of 1972.
Goes through the motion, hold on and hold on, hold on, river, time, river running right on over my head.
This is, as I said, this is the last album in that era that Bill Bruford played with him. He left right after that. I went back and looked. Yes is a band that's still around. They've famously been through a gazillion different lineup changes. This is their 5th album, and the Revolving Door had already been going in full swing by the time of this album. I mean, this is their 5th album. They have on this one they have 1, 2, they have 3 of the original founding members on this, and then by the time they made their next album, their 6th album, there were only 2 founding members left, John Anderson and Chris Squire, and that continued through the whole run of their career. They're still touring, they're still recording albums, and they're still changing up the mixture every time you turn around. And I went and looked. I don't know how many studio albums they did. It's in the around 30. In the 20s or 30s, I'm not sure, but I did go back and specifically look. This was the second of only 3 times in the entire 50+ year career of Yes that they put out 2 consecutive albums with the exact same lineup.
That'll kill you.
Right? Right. This is a Fragile. Fragile was the first record with Rick Wakeman. They had the same lineup on Fragile as they had on Close to the Edge. Bruford left, and then their next album was the first one with Alan White. But then after that, Wakeman left, and they brought in Patrick Moraz. And it's like, man, that Revolving Door it's been going for 50 some odd years. So.
It's hard to believe that given all of the turmoil that the band had been through and has been through, that at this point they actually have everybody has a key role. I mean, the record would not be what it is without every one of those guys.
I love it. It's at the top of my list. Always has been, always will be. Anything you want to add, Bill?
No, I think it certainly merits a playing, especially given its 50th anniversary, and check out the YouTube videos of them doing it, because in that era, I mean, they got it all going on. They got Steve Howe with playing one guitar while another guitar is mounted on the stand so that he can switch when without having to take the guitar off. Got Rick Wakeman, he's wearing his gigantic cloak with mirrored cloak, and his hair is halfway down to his waist, and
just surrounded by keyboards.
Surrounded by keyboards. I think famously they had to make Fragile right away so that they could pay for all the keyboards that he needed for his, the way he was going to approach the band, and everybody seems to be having a great time. So definitely give it a spin. I think it's well worth an investment in time and listening.
Yeah, I mean, musically, even if you're not musically, still it's a good, if you're at all interested in the history of rock music, this certainly is was a landmark in the history of rock music. No doubt about that. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll be back at you on Tuesday with probably roundtable, and next Friday with a review of some sort. Dan and Bob will be rejoining us here and there to talk about a few things, and Bill and I will be back a few times. Hit that subscribe button, and we'll talk to you soon. So long.